7 months pregnant, Sophia sat on the edge of her bed, the deep blue satin of her gown pooling around her like a bruise. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the flutter of life beneath silk, when the master suite door swung open with the arrogance of a man who'd forgotten what sacred meant. Donald stood in the doorway, his tailored suit crisp and cold, his arm occupied by a woman in red, a provocation, a stain in Sophia's sanctuary. The mistress clung to him with greedy curiosity, her eyes scanning the room she clearly intended to steal. "Sophia," Donald said, his voice carrying the dismissive edge of a man convinced he owned everything he saw. "We're hungry. Go downstairs and cook something." The silence that followed was surgical. Sophia's eyes, steady, clinical, measuring, moved from her husband to the woman wearing triumph like cheap perfume. She didn't rise, didn't flinch. She simply let the weight of her gaze settle on them both, the way an apex predator watches prey that doesn't yet know it's being hunted. The promise. This is the story of a woman who traded steel for silence, a beretta for a wedding ring, a throne in Tokyo for a townhouse in the suburbs. Sophia thought she could outrun her father's bloodline, bury the dragon beneath silk and prenatal vitamins. She thought love meant surrender. He was wrong. Because some women aren't built to beg. Some women are born with their father's eyes and their grandfather's rage, raised in rooms where loyalty is currency and betrayal is a death sentence. Donald just made the mistake every dead man makes. He confused her kindness for weakness. The world. Sophia Martin, née Song, was the only daughter of Lui Song, the patriarch who turned Seoul's underworld into an empire and Tokyo into his kingdom. She'd grown up in penthouses with bulletproof glass, learned her ABCs alongside tactical training, attended galas where she could name 12 pressure points before dessert was served. She'd spent 28 years as her father's princess, his dragon, his perfectly sharpened blade. And then she met Donald. Charming, normal, a corporate lawyer with clean hands and no idea what her last name really meant. She fell in love with his ordinary life, his safe world, his promise of something her father's fortress could never give her: peace. So she walked away. Traded the compound for a cul-de-sac. Let her father's invisible shield protect her from a distance while she played house with a man who thought he'd married a quiet, cultured woman with family money. He had no idea she'd broken a man's wrist at a charity gala once, just for touching her shoulder without permission. No idea her father had warned her, "You can dress a dragon in silk but never forget what it is." Now, as Donald's mistress smirked from the doorway and demanded she cook like a servant in her own home, Sophia felt something ancient and inevitable uncurl in her chest. The dragon was waking up. And dragons don't forgive. They incinerate. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. The memory hit Sophia like a blade between ribs, sharp, clean, inevitable. 3 years ago at the Metropolitan Museum charity gala, she'd worn ivory silk and her mother's pearls. A hedge fund manager named Preston Whitmore had leaned too close during the auction, his hand settling on her bare shoulder like he owned it. She'd smiled, taken his wrist, applied pressure to the precise point where tendon met bone. The crack echoed louder than the auctioneer's gavel. Preston screamed. Security rushed over. And Sophia had simply released him, her smile never wavering, her champagne glass steady in her other hand. Later in the car, her father Lui Song had lit a cigarette and studied her through the smoke. "You can dress a dragon in silk," he'd said quietly. "You can teach it to bow and pour tea and smile at men who don't deserve its teeth. But never forget what it is, daughter. A dragon that pretends too long forgets how to breathe fire. And a dragon that can't breathe fire is just a corpse wrapped in expensive fabric." "I want to be normal, father." Normal. He tasted the word like poison. Normal women don't have our bloodline. Normal women don't survive what you've survived. You can play house, Sophia. You can fall in love with some ordinary man who thinks money comes from office buildings instead of carefully managed fear. But the moment he forgets who you really are, the moment he mistakes your choice for weakness, you remember what I taught you. What did you teach me? Lui Song had smiled, cold and paternal. That dragons don't beg. They burn. Now, standing in her master suite doorway, watching Donald whisper something to his mistress that made her giggle, Sophia felt the ember of that memory catch flame. Her hand rested on her 7-month belly, feeling her daughter kick in protest at the tension radiating through her mother's body. The dragon was waking up. And Donald had no idea what he'd unleashed. The woman in red finally detached herself from Donald's arm and sauntered into the room like she was testing the carpet for purchase. She was younger than Sophia by perhaps 5 years, with the kind of manufactured beauty that came from good doctors and better lighting. Her eyes swept over Sophia's pregnant belly with something between pity and triumph. "You must be Sophia," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Donald's told me so much about you." "Well, not much really. There isn't much to tell, is there?" Sophia's hand remained on her belly, feeling her daughter kick again. Harder this time. She said nothing, just watched the way predators watch. Calm, patient, measuring the distance between threat and response. The mistress, Veronica, Donald had called her in the car, thinking Sophia was asleep, picked up a framed photo from the dresser. Their wedding day. Sophia in white lace. Donald looking at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. "God, you look so different here. What happened?" "Oh, right." She gestured at Sophia's stomach with a dismissive wave. "That happened. Donald says you've been useless lately. Too tired, too slow, too pregnant to be a real wife." Donald shifted uncomfortably in the doorway but didn't contradict her. That silence hit harder than any words could have. "He needs a woman who can keep up," Veronica continued, setting the frame down face first with deliberate cruelty. "Someone who can still fit into a cocktail dress. Someone who doesn't spend all day waddling around eating pickles and crying about swollen ankles. Someone who can actually satisfy him, if you know what I mean." She walked closer to Sophia, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a countdown. "You're basically just an incubator at this point. And once that baby comes out, you'll be even more useless. Stretch marks, saggy breasts, crying at all hours. Donald deserves better than a used-up baby factory." The silence that followed was the kind that comes before thunder. Sophia finally moved, rising from the bed with a grace that made pregnancy look like a choice rather than a burden. 7 months of carrying her daughter hadn't dulled her reflexes or her presence. If anything, motherhood had sharpened her, given her something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth burning the whole world down to defend. She walked past them both without a word, her blue satin gown whispering against the hardwood like secrets, her bare feet silent as a ghost's. Her crown of natural curls caught the bedroom light, turning her silhouette into something almost regal. "Where are you going?" Donald called after her, his voice carrying the irritation of a man inconvenienced. "To cook," Sophia said quietly, each word precise as a scalpel. "As requested." She didn't look back. Didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing whether his betrayal had landed. Dragons didn't show their wounds to people who'd caused them. They just remembered. And they waited. The kitchen was her favorite room in the house. French marble counters, professional-grade appliances, a chef's knife collection that Donald had bought her for their first anniversary, back when he still noticed what made her smile. She stood at the island now, her hands moving automatically to gather ingredients she had no intention of preparing. Her fingers closed around the 8-inch Wusthof chef's knife, the one with perfect balance and a blade that could split a hair. She tested its edge against her thumb, not quite pressing, just measuring. The steel sang softly as she turned it, watching shadows dance across the blade. 12 pressure points between the island and the door. She'd counted them the first week they'd moved in, the way she counted exits in restaurants, escape routes in office buildings, sight lines in parking garages. Old habits from a life she'd promised Donald she'd left behind. Old reflexes from a childhood spent learning that survival meant staying 3 moves ahead. Carotid artery, 7 steps from the island just past the refrigerator. Solar plexus, 5 steps near the breakfast nook. Floating ribs, 3 steps by the wine rack Donald had insisted on installing. Kidney, 2 steps right where the kitchen opened into the dining room. Femoral artery, 6 steps, near the door to the hallway. Knee, 4 steps by the butcher block. Instep, anywhere really. Just needed the right angle and enough force. The knife caught the light as she turned it, her reflection fragmenting across the blade. She could see herself in pieces, her eyes, her mouth, her hands. The parts of her that Donald had loved before he'd decided they weren't enough. The parts of her that her father had trained before she'd decided to be normal. She could do it. 3 minutes, maybe less. Veronica first. An amateur, no training, would go down with a single strike to the right pressure point. Donald second, he'd freeze the way he always did when confronted with actual violence. He'd fainted once at a nosebleed during a dinner party, thrown up another time when he'd cut his hand on a broken glass. He had no stomach for blood, no tolerance for pain that wasn't theoretical. Sophia set the knife down carefully, blade facing away, handle aligned with the edge of the cutting board. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Precision in small things teaches precision in large things. A knife that's carelessly placed is a hand that's carelessly lost. Not yet. Dragons were patient. And revenge, her father had taught her since she was old enough to understand the concept, was a dish best served with witnesses and legal documentation. She pulled out vegetables she didn't plan to cut, chicken she wouldn't cook, ingredients for a meal that would never be served. The motion calmed her, gave her hands something to do while her mind worked through probabilities and consequences. Upstairs she could hear Veronica's laughter, high and sharp. Donald's deeper voice responding, the words indistinct but the tone familiar. That careful, placating sound he used when he wanted something. When he was managing someone. He'd used that tone on Sophia for months now. She'd just been too buried in pregnancy and hoped to recognize it for what it was. The knife gleamed on the counter, patient as death, ready as prayer. Donald appeared in the kitchen doorway, his tie loosened, his expression carrying the entitled exhaustion of a man who thought he'd already won. His suit was still crisp, still expensive, still everything he thought defined success. He'd taken off his jacket, draped it over his arm like he was in a cologne commercial. "Listen," he said, not quite meeting her eyes, his gaze sliding somewhere over her left shoulder. "Veronica and I have been talking. The master suite, it's got the best closet space, the better bathroom, the view. And she's going to be staying here for a while. She needs room for her wardrobe. Professional clothes, evening wear, that sort of thing. She's very particular about her appearance." Sophia's hands stilled over the cutting board. A carrot sat there, uncut, orange and ordinary. "So you're going to need to move into the guest room," he continued, his voice taking on that corporate tone he used when he'd already made a decision and was just informing the underlings. The tone that said discussion was a courtesy, not a democracy. "Just temporarily. Until after the baby comes and we figure out more permanent arrangements. The guest room is actually quieter. You'll sleep better there. And you're up half the night anyway with the pregnancy, so really it makes sense. Permanent arrangements." The words hung in the air like smoke. "Sophia, don't be dramatic. You're 7 months pregnant. You're barely sleeping anyway, and the guest room is actually closer to the bathroom, which should help with all your midnight trips. You'll be more comfortable there. And let's be honest, you've been taking up a lot of space in the bedroom with all your pregnancy pillows and that ridiculous body support thing." She turned to face him fully, the knife still on the counter behind her, her hands empty and open. Her blue satin gown pooled around her feet like spilled ink. "You're evicting me from my own bedroom." "I'm not evicting you. Jesus, Sophia, why do you have to make everything so difficult? I'm asking you to be reasonable. Veronica is important to me. He makes me happy. You..." He gestured vaguely at her belly, her face, her entire existence. "You've been different since the pregnancy. Distant. Cold. You barely look at me anymore. You're always tired, always complaining about something hurting. I need someone who sees me, Sophia. Someone who makes me feel alive. Someone who isn't just going through the motions." "And where will I go? After the baby?" Donald had the decency to look uncomfortable for approximately 3 seconds. "We'll discuss it. Maybe you could move closer to your family. Isn't your father in Tokyo? I'm sure he'd be happy to have his daughter and granddaughter nearby. You always said you missed him. This could be good for you, actually. A fresh start. You could raise the baby in Japan, let her learn about her heritage. I'd visit, obviously. We'd work out custody arrangements that make sense for everyone." "Her heritage," Sophia repeated softly. "Your heritage, I mean. The Korean side. You know what I mean." "My father," Sophia said, her voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous, "is exactly where he's always been." Something in her tone made Donald pause, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. For just a moment he looked like he was remembering something. Maybe the night they'd met when she'd intimidated 3 of his colleagues just by the way she held a wine glass. Maybe the time she'd corrected his boss's Mandarin at a firm dinner and the man had actually apologized. Maybe one of the dozen small moments when she'd let slip that she was more than he'd wanted to see. But Veronica's laugh drifted in from the bedroom, and whatever instinct might have warned him evaporated in the sound of her amusement. "Just pack some things," he said, turning away. "Tonight. Veronica wants to organize the closet tomorrow, and it'll be easier if your stuff isn't in the way." He walked away, and Sophia stood in the kitchen with the knife on the counter and 12 pressure points mapped in her mind and a daughter kicking in her belly like she was already ready to fight. The guest room was smaller, colder, decorated in the neutral tones of a space meant for people who didn't belong. Beige walls, cream curtains, furniture that looked expensive but felt temporary. Sophia sat on the edge of the bed, her small overnight bag at her feet, her hands folded over her belly. Her daughter was kicking again, insistent little jabs that felt like Morse code. "I'm here," the kick seemed to say. "I'm real. I'm counting on you. I'm trusting you to protect us." Sophia reached into the bag and pulled out something she'd hidden in the lining 3 years ago, on the day she'd married Donald. A burner phone, untraceable, unchanged, still holding a single contact. She'd sewn it into a hidden pocket herself, using techniques her father's people had taught her when she was 16. Father. She'd promised herself she'd never use it. Promised Donald, promised herself, promised the version of Sophia who'd believed in fresh starts and clean breaks and the possibility of being someone new. She'd promised that she could be normal, that love could be enough, that she could trade her father's empire for a townhouse in Brooklyn and not regret it. But promises were contracts, and Donald had just voided every clause. She pressed call. It rang once. "Daughter." Lui Song's voice came through clear as crystal, despite the 13-hour time difference and 7,000 miles between them. He didn't sound surprised. He never did. He'd probably been waiting for this call since the day she told him she was getting married. "I was wondering when you would remember who you are." "He brought another woman into our home." Her voice was steady, clinical, each word a diagnosis. "He told me to cook for her. He's moving me into the guest room because she needs closet space for her wardrobe. He's talking about permanent arrangements. About me moving to Tokyo after the baby comes so he can play house with his mistress in the home you bought us." The silence on the other end was the kind that preceded avalanches, the kind that came before cities burned. When Lui Song finally spoke, his voice had dropped to something colder than winter in Seoul, quieter than a blade through silk. "Donald Wright," her father said, each word precise as a surgical cut. 34 years old. Attorney at Morrison and Clark. Bar license number 4782933. Social Security number 421-86-9357. Bank account balance currently $847,293.18, though he doesn't know that $600,000 of that was my wedding gift, carefully laundered through his firm's bonus structure over 3 years. Sophia's breath caught. She'd known her father had been generous with wedding gifts, but she hadn't known the extent. His promotion to senior partner 3 years ago? I bought it. $6 million to the firm's managing partners, structured as a client retainer that required Donald's appointment. His corner office? I suggested it after acquiring a controlling interest in the building through a shell corporation. The brownstone you live in? The deed lists you both, but the down payment came from an offshore account that tracks back to me through 4 holding companies. Did you think I would let my daughter marry a man and not become his invisible benefactor? Did you think I would allow my only child to depend on someone who hadn't earned his position? Father. I have been the shield around your house since the day you said, "I do" to that mediocre little man, Lui Song continued, his voice gaining an edge that Sophia hadn't heard since she was a child watching him negotiate with men who didn't live through the conversation. I have been the hand that guided his career, the shadow that protected your peace, the ghost that paid for his illusion of success. His car, leased through a company I own. His gym membership, complimentary because I bought the facility. His tailored suits, discounted because the tailor owes me a favor that will never be repaid. Every comfort, every luxury, every moment of pride he's felt in the past 3 years. Purchased with my money, arranged by my people, permitted by my patience. Sophia closed her eyes, seeing her marriage in a new light. Seeing Donald's confidence, his swagger, his sense of having made it. All of it built on foundations he'd never seen. "And now he brings a whore into my daughter's home," her father said, the word crisp and final, "and tells you to sleep in a guest room like a servant? Tells you to move to Tokyo so he can play house with some woman whose entire net worth couldn't buy her way into my building's lobby? Father, I don't want violence in my home. Not with the baby. There will be no violence unless he is foolish enough to create it, Lui Song said softly, which was somehow more terrifying than if he'd shouted. I am sending the Wraiths. They will arrive at midnight. Pack what you need for yourself and my granddaughter. Your clothes, your jewelry, any personal items you cannot replace. Everything else I will replace. Better. In Tokyo where you belong. I don't know if I'm ready to come home. You are not coming home, daughter. You are being extracted from a situation that insults your bloodline and endangers my granddaughter. There is a difference. The Wraiths are professionals. They know how to remove garbage without disturbing the neighbors or leaving evidence that would require explanations. Your husband will be given a choice. Leave quietly and keep his life, or resist and learn why people don't betray the Song family. Sophia's hand tightened on the phone. What about the house? Already being transferred to your name only. The paperwork will be filed at 11:45 p.m. tonight. By midnight you will be the sole legal owner. Donald will have 30 minutes to vacate. After that he will be trespassing in your home, and we both know how I handle trespassers. And his job. His employment will be terminated Monday morning. Morrison and Clark will receive notice that their largest client, my Shell Corporation, is dissatisfied with Donald's handling of their account. There will be an investigation into his billing practices. Nothing criminal, just enough to make him unemployable at any major firm. He'll spend the next 5 years working for legal aid or ambulance chasers, trying to remember what it felt like to be important. Sophia felt something cold and satisfied settle in her chest. Not quite revenge. More like justice. Like the world correcting itself after being knocked off balance. Thank you, Father. Don't thank me. Thank yourself for finally calling. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten you were a Song before you became a Wright. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the warmth he reserved only for her. You were never meant to bow, daughter. You were meant to reign. Come home. Let me show my granddaughter what empire her mother walked away from. Let me teach her that she comes from dragons, not from whatever Donald Wright thought he was building. The line went dead. Sophia sat in the darkness of the guest room, her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter's kicks like small affirmations. Like tiny fists ready to fight. She looked at her overnight bag, considered what to pack, what to leave behind. Then she heard Veronica's laughter from the master suite, high and careless, the sound of someone who thought she'd won. Sophia smiled. And waited for midnight. The knock came at exactly 12 a.m., 3 sharp raps that echoed through the brownstone like gunshots, like judgment, like the sound of doors closing on a life that was already over. Sophia was already awake, dressed in black leggings and a loose black tunic that accommodated her belly, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, her face bare of makeup. She looked like the woman she'd been before Donald. Sharp, ready, dangerous. A weapon disguised as a pregnant woman, a dragon pretending to be decorative. She heard Donald stumble out of the master suite, Veronica's sleepy complaint following him. Who the hell knocks at midnight? Donald, call the police. This is harassment. Sophia opened the guest room door and moved to the top of the stairs, one hand on the railing, the other on her belly. She watched as Donald descended, tying his robe, his hair messy, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion to something approaching fear as he reached the door. He checked the peephole, then turned back toward the stairs, his face pale. Sophia, there are people in tactical gear outside our door. What is this? What did you do? Open it, she said quietly. I'm calling the police. The police are aware of their presence. Open the door, Donald. Something in her voice, the command, the certainty, the absolute lack of fear, made him comply. His hands shook as he turned the locks, and when he pulled the door open, 3 figures stepped inside without waiting for invitation. They wore tactical gear, black, seamless, professional. No visible weapons, but Sophia knew they were armed in ways that wouldn't show on a casual scan, in ways that wouldn't trigger metal detectors or raise questions. 2 men, 1 woman, all moving with the fluid precision of people who'd killed before and would kill again if the situation required it. The woman in front pulled down her face covering, revealing features that were Korean, beautiful, and utterly devoid of warmth. She looked past Donald like he was furniture, like he was an obstacle that would be removed if he didn't have the good sense to move himself. Her eyes found Sophia at the top of the stairs. She bowed. Deep, respectful, the kind of bow reserved for royalty, for people whose word was law and whose bloodline demanded recognition. The two men followed suit, their movements synchronized, their respect absolute. Miss Song, the woman said in flawless English touched with a Seoul accent. Your father sends his regards. I am Ji-won. These are Tae and Minjun. We are here to escort you home and to ensure your comfort during the transition. Donald's face had gone white, then gray, cycling through colors like a sunset in reverse. What? Who are you people? Sophia, what is this? This is our home. You can't just. Ji-won cut him off with a look that could have frozen blood. Mr. Wright, you have 30 minutes to vacate this property. Miss Song is the sole legal owner as of 11:47 p.m. tonight. The paperwork has been filed with the county recorder's office and will be processed Monday morning. You are currently trespassing. If you leave quietly and sign the dissolution papers I've prepared, you will receive a settlement of $50,000 and a guarantee of no further action from the Song family. If you resist, we will remove you by force, and you will receive nothing but a restraining order and a very expensive legal battle you cannot win. That's insane. This is my house. I bought this house. Sophia, tell them. Sophia descended the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, the other on her belly. The wraiths parted to let her through, their bodies forming a protective corridor, a living wall between her and the man who'd thought he could discard her. It was never your house, she said quietly, each word landing like a stone in still water. It was my father's gift. And he's taking it back. Everything you thought you owned, everything you thought you built, every success you celebrated. It was given to you because I asked my father to let you feel like a man. Like someone worthy of being my husband. And you repaid that gift by bringing your mistress into our bed and telling me to cook for her. Veronica appeared at the top of the stairs in one of Sophia's silk robes, her hair messy, her expression shifting from annoyance to confusion to fear as she took in the three figures in tactical gear. The pregnant woman who suddenly looked nothing like a victim, the air in the room that had turned cold and dangerous. Donald, what is happening? Who are these people? Shut up, Donald hissed, his voice breaking. Just shut up. Ji-won smiled, and it was not a kind expression. Miss Song, your car is waiting outside. We have a flight arranged to Tokyo at 3 a.m. from a private airfield. Your father has prepared your rooms in the compound, and a full medical team will be available for your prenatal care. Is there anything in this house you wish to bring with you? Sophia looked around the foyer at the life she'd tried to build, the normal existence she'd reached for. The wedding photos on the wall. The furniture they'd picked out together. The carefully curated art that was supposed to signal taste and success. No, she said. There's nothing here I need. The front window exploded inward. Glass and lead and the sharp crack of gunfire turned the foyer into a war zone in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Ji-won moved before the first shard hit the ground, her body covering Sophia's, pushing her behind the stairs into the protected space underneath. Tae and Minjun drew weapons that appeared in their hands like magic, like they'd been waiting for this, returning fire through the shattered window with the practiced precision of people who'd done this before. Rival family, Ji-won hissed in Korean, her body still shielding Sophia's. The Park brothers. They must have been watching the house, waiting for an opportunity. They're not here for you, they're here to embarrass your father by harming what he values most. More gunfire. The chandelier shattered, raining crystal like deadly snow. Veronica screamed from upstairs, a high, panicked sound that cut off abruptly. Donald had thrown himself flat on the floor, his hands over his head, whimpering, a wet stain spreading across his expensive pajama pants. He'd pissed himself. Sophia's training kicked in like muscle memory, like breathing, like something she'd been born knowing. She assessed the situation with the cold clarity her father had drilled into her since childhood. 3 attackers outside based on the firing pattern, maybe 4. Automatic weapons, poor discipline. They were spraying bullets instead of aiming, wasting ammunition. The Parks had always been more ambition than skill, more reputation than talent. Give me a weapon, Sophia said in Korean, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Ji-won looked at her, then at her 7-month pregnant belly, conflict clear in her expression. Miss Song, your father would. Would what? Want his daughter to hide while people shoot at her? Give me a weapon. Now. Ji-won handed her a Glock 19, compact and familiar, the weight of it settling into Sophia's hand like coming home. She checked the magazine with movements that were automatic, chambered around, her hands steady despite not having held a gun in 3 years. She moved to the window adjacent to the broken one, staying low, one hand on her belly, the other holding the Glock with professional competence. Through the darkness, she could see 2 figures behind a car across the street, their muzzle flashes giving away their position like they were amateurs, like they'd never been taught that light was death in a firefight. Sophia took a breath, let it out slowly, aimed for center mass on the first target. She fired twice. Both figures dropped. The muscle memory was perfect. Her father's training had been thorough, relentless, designed to be unforgettable. Hours on the range. Hundreds of thousands of rounds. Scenarios and simulations and real situations where the targets shot back. Minjun took out the third attacker trying to flank from the east side of the house, his shots precise and economical. Tae threw something small and dark through the broken window. A flashbang. The explosion lit up the night like lightning, followed by screaming from whoever had been providing cover. Then silence fell like a curtain, like the end of a performance. Jiwon was on her radio speaking rapid Korean. Cleanup crew en route. 2 minutes. Medical assessment needed for Miss Song. She engaged in combat while 7 months pregnant. Mr. Song will want confirmation that his granddaughter is unharmed. Sophia set the Glock down carefully on the hall table, her hands still steady despite the adrenaline come down starting to hit. She looked at Donald, still flat on the floor, the wet stain on his pants visible even in the dim light, his face pressed against the hardwood. The mighty senior partner. The man who'd thought he could discard his wife like old furniture, replace her with a younger model, take what her father had given him and act like he'd earned it. He'd pissed himself at the sound of gunfire while his 7-month pregnant wife had returned fire with the precision of someone who'd been doing it since she was 16. "Sophia," he whispered, his voice breaking, tears streaming down his face. "What are you? What the fuck are you?" She walked over to him, her movements graceful despite her belly, despite having just been in a firefight, despite the glass crunching under her bare feet. She crouched down, awkward, heavy but still somehow regal, and looked him in the eyes. "I'm the woman you should have loved better," she said softly. "I'm the dragon you thought you'd tamed. I'm the daughter of Lui Song, and you made the mistake of thinking I was just Sophia Wright, attorney's wife, pregnant and convenient and disposable." She stood with Jiwon's assistance, glass falling from her clothes like diamonds. "I'm your worst mistake," she said. "And you'll remember me every time you try to sleep in a bed you didn't earn, every time you apply for a job you won't get, every time you look at yourself in the mirror and see what you could have had if you'd just been decent." Jiwon handed Sophia a manila folder while Tae and Minjun swept the house for additional threats. Outside, the cleanup crew had arrived. Silent men in unmarked coveralls who removed bodies with the efficiency of movers handling furniture, who collected shell casings and photographed trajectories and would have the scene sanitized before sunrise. Sophia threw the folder at Donald. It hit his chest and fell open, papers spilling across the floor like accusations, like evidence, like the truth he'd never bothered to look for. "Your bar license," Sophia said, her voice clinical, factual, merciless. "Granted because my father made a phone call to the ethics board when your undergraduate plagiarism charge should have disqualified you. The transcript is there. Page 4. You copied 16 pages from another student's senior thesis. Should have been expelled. Would have been, except Lui Song made it disappear." Donald stared at the papers, his hands shaking as he reached for them. "Your position at Morrison & Clark. Bought with a $2 million retainer my father paid the firm to take you on as senior associate. The contract is there. Page 7. See the signature? That's James Morrison himself, agreeing to hire you in exchange for guaranteed business from Song Enterprises. You thought you got that job because of your interview. You thought you earned it." She moved forward, her belly brushing against the pile of papers, her presence overwhelming despite her pregnancy. "Your corner office. Purchased when my father acquired a controlling interest in the building through 3 shell companies. The ownership documents are on page 12. The view you love. That 42nd floor prestige? Bought. Your car, your clothes, your gym membership, your country club dues. All paid through accounts that trace back to Lui Song. The bank statements are on page 19. Donald's face had gone from gray to green. He looked like he might vomit. "Every victory you celebrated," Sophia continued, her voice soft now, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "Every promotion you bragged about at dinner parties, Every time you looked at yourself in the mirror and saw a successful man, you were looking at a gift from a ghost. You were looking at what my father built for you because I asked him to let you feel like you deserved me. She knelt down, awkward with her belly, and picked up one specific document. This is the prenuptial agreement you signed 3 years ago. Do you remember reading it? I read it. My lawyer said it was standard. Your lawyer worked for my father. And clearly you didn't read page 17, section 4, subsection B. Let me refresh your memory. In the event of proven adultery, the offending party forfeits all assets acquired during the marriage and agrees to a financial settlement determined by the aggrieved party's legal representation, said settlement not to exceed the sum the offending party brought into the marriage. She let that sink in, watching his face cycle through realization, horror, understanding. You brought $47,000 into this marriage, Donald. Mostly student loan debt and a used Honda. So congratulations, you're leaving with $50,000, which is more than you deserve. My father is feeling generous because I asked him not to destroy you completely. I asked him to let you keep enough to start over somewhere far away from me. Donald's hands trembled as he gathered the papers, as the full weight of his situation crashed over him like a wave. Sophia, please. I made a mistake. I can fix this. We can fix this. I love you. You loved what my father built for you, she said, standing with Ji-won's help. You loved the life you thought you'd earned. You never loved me. You loved what having me made you feel about yourself. There's a difference. She walked to the door where the black SUV was waiting, its engine running, its tinted windows hiding whoever waited inside. You have until sunrise to sign the dissolution papers and leave this house. After that, Ji-won will have you arrested for trespassing, and the settlement offer expires. Choose wisely. Veronica had crept down the stairs during the conversation, her face streaked with tears and mascara, her borrowed robe clutched around her. This is insane. Donald, we can fight this. We can sue, we can get lawyers. With what money? Sophia asked almost kindly. His bank accounts will be frozen by morning. His credit cards will be cancelled. His bar license will be under review for the ethics violations that have been carefully documented over the past 3 years. By the time he finishes fighting my father's legal team, he'll be 65 and bankrupt, and you'll have left him for someone who can actually afford to keep you interested. She paused at the door, one hand on the frame, her silhouette backlit by the streetlights. Or he can take the $50,000, disappear, and thank whatever god he prays to that Lui Song's daughter asked for mercy instead of revenge. Your choice, Donald. But choose quickly. My father's patience has limits and you've already exceeded mine. Sophia gave birth to her daughter in Tokyo, in a private hospital wing that overlooked the city her father ruled like a benevolent emperor, like a dragon who'd learned to wear human skin but never forgot what he was underneath. The labor lasted 14 hours, brutal and transformative, and when they placed the tiny, screaming creature on her chest, Sophia wept for the first time since leaving America. She wept for the marriage that had failed, for the normal life she'd wanted, for the version of herself who'd believed she could be someone other than Lui Song's daughter. She wept for her daughter who would grow up knowing what Sophia had tried to hide, that their family was built on power and fear and the kind of strength that didn't apologize. And then she stopped weeping and started planning. She named her daughter Hannah. Flower. Something beautiful and delicate and deceptively strong, capable of growing through concrete, of blooming in impossible conditions, of being soft without being weak. A dragon and a flower, Lui Song said, holding his granddaughter with hands that had ordered 100 deaths but cradled the baby like she was made of light, like she was the most precious thing he'd ever touched. She will be stronger than both of us combined. She will have your mother's grace and your fire and my patience. The world will not know what to do with her. Sophia recovered in her father's compound, surrounded by gardens and security and women who'd served the Song family for generations. They taught her that motherhood and power were not mutually exclusive, that feeding a baby at 3 a.m. didn't make her less dangerous, that the softness required to nurture didn't diminish the hardness required to protect. She trained again, carefully at first, rebuilding strength in her body while her daughter slept in a bassinet nearby. She studied the family business with new eyes, learning the parts her father had shielded her from when she was younger and more idealistic. She understood now what she hadn't before. That power was responsibility, that strength was protection, that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was be willing to burn the world down for the people who mattered. And she made a decision. 6 months after Hana's birth, Sophia opened a dojo in the Shibuya district, in a building her father owned but let her operate independently. She called it Dragon's Choice, and the name meant something different to everyone who walked through the doors. It wasn't a traditional martial arts school. It wasn't about belts and ranks and competitive sparring. It was a place where women came to remember what they were before the world told them to be smaller, quieter, more convenient, more palatable. Before they learned that taking up space was rude, that having teeth was unattractive, that breathing fire would make them unlovable. Sophia taught them pressure points and knife work and how to move through a room like they owned it. She taught them the difference between being kind and being weak, between choosing peace and accepting disrespect, between loving someone and losing yourself. She taught them that dragons could wear silk and pour tea and smile at charity galas, but they should never forget what they were underneath. On the wall of the dojo, she hung a single photograph. Her wedding day, when she'd believed in fresh starts and ordinary love and the possibility of being normal. She'd kept it not as punishment but as reminder of what she'd survived, of what she'd learned, of the price of forgetting who you were. 1 year after leaving America, Sophia received an envelope from G1. Inside was a photograph of Donald, taken outside a legal aid office in Newark. He looked older, thinner, beaten by a world that no longer cushioned his fall. He was wearing clothes that didn't fit quite right, carrying a briefcase that had seen better days, walking into a building that represented everything he'd thought he'd left behind. There was no satisfaction in seeing him broken. No joy in his diminishment. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the universe had corrected itself, that consequences had found someone who'd thought himself immune. But there was peace. Deep, settled, certain. Sophia stood in her dojo that evening, Hana sleeping in a carrier against her chest, and taught a class of 15 women how to break a wrist at the radius. They practiced on training dummies, their movements growing confident, their faces fierce and focused, their bodies remembering what their minds had been taught to forget. After class, a young woman approached, barely 20, with bruises on her arms she tried to hide under long sleeves, with eyes that had learned to look at the ground instead of at people. "Sensei Song," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can you really teach me to stop being afraid?" Sophia adjusted her daughter against her chest, feeling Hana's heartbeat against her own, feeling the weight of responsibility and legacy and choice. She thought of Donald and Veronica, of guest rooms and red dresses, of the moment she'd stopped pretending and remembered how to breathe fire. She thought of her father's words, "You can dress a dragon in silk but never forget what it is." "I can teach you something better," Sophia said, taking the young woman's hand, feeling her tremble and then steady. "I can teach you that you were never weak. You were just kind. And there's a difference. Kindness is a choice. Weakness is a condition. One you control. The other controls you." The young woman's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "Dragons don't beg," Sophia said softly, her father's words and her own truth, her history and her daughter's future. "They burn. And then, if they choose, they teach others to do the same. So no, I can't teach you to stop being afraid. But I can teach you to be afraid and dangerous at the same time. I can teach you that fear is information, not instruction. And I can teach you that the world will always have men who mistake your kindness for weakness. The question is whether you'll let them keep making that mistake, or whether you'll teach them the lesson they should have learned the first time." Outside, Tokyo glittered like a promise, like possibility, like a city that belonged to dragons who'd learned to walk among humans. Inside, 15 women bowed to their sensei, the dragon who'd remembered her fire, the mother who was building an army of flowers with teeth, the daughter who'd returned to her father's empire and made it her own. And somewhere in America, in a house that had been stripped of everything valuable, in a life that had been reduced to its component parts, Donald Wright learned what every fool eventually learns: that some women are not to be tested. Some women are to be treasured. And some mistakes don't offer second chances. They just burn. And burn. And burn. Sophia smiled, kissed her daughter's head and began teaching the next class. Because dragons were patient. And revenge, she'd learned, wasn't a single moment. It was a life well lived, a daughter well raised, a legacy well built. It was waking up every morning and choosing to be exactly who you were meant to be. Final. And that's how a dragon reminded the world what happens when you mistake her mercy for weakness. Sophia didn't just walk away. She burned down everything Donald thought he'd built and rose from the ashes as exactly who she'd always been. Lui Song's daughter, a mother, a queen who chose kindness but never forgot her teeth. Subscribe to see more stories where betrayal meets its match and quiet wives reveal they were never quiet, just patient. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to say hello and know how far Sophia's story has traveled across the world. And if you loved watching Donald learn that some women don't beg, they burn, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to remember that kindness is a choice, not a weakness. Next time, we'll meet another woman who was underestimated. And the people who learned that lesson far too late. Until then, remember, dragons don't apologize for their fire. They just make sure you never forget it. See you in the next story. Fire.